It's pretty wild how much we're all learning online these days, right? Like it feels like everything is moving digital, even learning. And one of the things I've been noticing is this rise of like on-screen characters sort of acting as teachers.
Yeah.
These multimedia pedagogical agents, I think they're
Yeah,
called.
pedagogical
Yeah,
agents.
so it's like they're kind of like guides within a learning environment. They
Yeah.
use visuals and text and sometimes even their voice to help you navigate information or pick up new skills.
Right. And you brought us some really interesting research to dive into today. A meta-analysis, actually, that looks at just how effective these digital instructors are. Like, does it actually work to have this character teaching you something?
Yeah, that's what I'm curious about because, you see some research that really sings the praises of these agents. They say, oh, they boost learning, but then other studies are like, not so sure.
Exactly. And this meta-analysis is looking at a whole bunch of studies altogether
Oh.
to try to figure out, well, what are the aspects of these agents that really matter? Their appearance, their gender, whether they use gestures, eye movements, are they animated? What kind of voice do they have or don't they have a voice? What actually makes a difference for your learning?
Right. So our goal is to really kind of sift through all of that and see what the research is telling us.
Yeah. And to help us with that, we need to consider some of the big theories in multimedia learning and how we interact with computers, like cognitive load theory.
Yeah.
Have you heard of that one?
Oh, yeah. That's all about how much information your brain can handle at once, right?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
if you overload people with too much stuff, it's harder to learn.
It's like trying to drink from a fire hose.
Right. And then there's the cognitive theory of multimedia learning,
Okay.
which looks at how we process visuals and sounds together.
Makes sense.
And then we've got these really cool theories about how we react to computers socially. Like,
Mhm.
are we actually treating computers like they're people?
Yeah, like the whole computers are social actors thing.
Right.
Right.
Exactly that one. And social agency theory. And we'll even touch on the uncanny valley idea,
Mhm.
where things get creepy if they look almost human, but not quite.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
And the action observation network, which has to do with how our brains process movement.
Okay. This is a lot to unpack, but it sounds super interesting.
Right. And we're not going to go super deep into the weeds with all the theories, but
Yeah.
we are going to pull out the juicy bits that help us understand how to design and use these pedagogical agents so they actually work for you.
Okay, I like that, extracting the good stuff.
Yeah.
All right, so let's start with the big picture.
Okay.
When people learn with these multimedia pedagogical agents, does it actually lead to better outcomes than if they learned without them?
So the overall finding from this big meta-analysis is that, yes, on average, learning with a multimedia pedagogical agent is a little bit more effective than learning without one.
Okay.
Now, it's not a huge difference, but they did find a statistically significant positive effect. They call it a G plus of 0.20.
Okay, now I'm not a statistician, so can you break down what that .20 means in plain English?
Sure, so G plus is just their way of measuring how strong the effect is.
Okay.
And 0.20 is considered a small positive effect, meaning it's not like a game changer, but it does suggest that these agents give you a bit of an edge when you're learning.
Okay, so a small advantage, but an advantage nonetheless.
Right.
Now you said on average, so I'm guessing the impact isn't exactly the same in every single situation. Right.
There was a lot of variation in the results across different studies,
I see.
which tells us that effectiveness really depends on, a bunch of different factors.
Okay, and that's what we want to figure out, what are those factors?
Exact, like what makes these agents helpful or not.
Right, so let's start with something that's immediately obvious, the agent's appearance.
Okay.
What's better, a 2D agent or a 3D agent?
Now, this is where things get interesting. The meta-analysis found that 2D agents were actually more effective for learning than 3D agents.
Great.
The average effect size for 2D agents was a G plus of 0.38. Remember, that's a small to medium positive effect.
Okay.
While 3D agents only had a tiny effect of G plus 0.11.
That's a pretty big difference. You'd think that a more realistic 3D character would be more engaging, and therefore more effective.
Right. It seems intuitive, but think about it this way.
Okay.
Our brains can only process so much information at once. That's where cognitive load theory comes in.
Right, the fire hose analogy.
Exactly. And the cognitive theory of multimedia learning tells us that when you add extra visual details that aren't essential to the learning itself, like, the super realistic textures and shadows of a 3D agent, it can actually distract you.
Oh, I see. So it's like your brain is too busy processing all the fancy visuals and it can't focus on the actual learning content.
Exactly. It's like trying to find a specific book in a super cluttered library.
Right. So a simpler 2D design might actually help you focus better.
Yeah.
Because it reduces the visual noise.
Precisely. It's like having a clean, minimalist workspace for your brain.
So for someone who's designing educational materials or even just choosing which ones to use this, suggests that simpler might be better when it comes to these pedagogical agents.
Yeah, less is more.
Now, what about the idea that we tend to respond to computers more when they seem more human-like? The whole computers are social actors thing.
That's a great point, and it does seem to contradict what we just talked about.
Right, you'd think a more human-like 3D agent would be more engaging.
You would, but in this case, the evidence seems to favor those cognitive load and multimedia learning theories, at least when it comes to how the agent looks.
Interesting. Okay, so appearance-wise, keep it simple. What about the agent's gender? Does it matter if it's male, female, or something else?
So the meta-analysis found that the gender of the agent didn't really make a difference in how much people learned.
Huh.
Now, they did see a small positive effect for female agents, a G plus of 0.30.
Okay.
But statistically speaking, it wasn't any different from male or other gender agents.
So it seems like you're not going to learn better or worse just because of the agent's gender.
Right. And this actually fits pretty well with the computers are social actors hypothesis.
How so?
Well, it suggests that maybe it's the social role of the agent that matters more than its specific gender, you know?
Oh, okay, so because it's acting as a teacher or instructor, that's enough to create a social connection, regardless of whether it appears male or female.
Exactly. We might be engaging socially with it because it's helping us learn.
Gotcha. Okay. Another piece of the puzzle solved now. What about all those nonverbal cues, the gestures, the eye contact, facial expressions? Do those things matter?
This is where some of our assumptions about social interaction might get turned upside down,
Oh,
because the meta-analysis found that whether the agent used gestures and eye gaze or not didn't actually affect learning.
really? You'd think that, a gesturing agent could really help highlight key points visually,
Right.
or that making eye contact would make you feel more connected and engaged with the agent.
Yeah, those are all valid points, but it seems like those things didn't make a noticeable difference.
Huh? Why not? I mean, we do all that stuff when we're teaching other humans.
It's true, but remember, the computers are social actors hypothesis.
Yeah.
It might be that even basic social cues from computers are enough to trigger that social response in us.
Okay.
And maybe more subtle cues like specific hand gestures or eye movements just don't change the learning dynamic all that much in this digital setting.
Interesting. What about facial expressions? Did it matter if the agent's face was static, or if it had simple movements like lip syncing, or even more complex dynamic expressions like smiling or frowning?
So the complexity of facial expressions also didn't significantly affect overall effectiveness. They did find a moderate effect size for agents with static faces, a G plus of 0.42.
Okay.
But again, it wasn't statistically different from the effects of simple or complex dynamic expressions.
So basically, an agent with a poker face was just as good as one that was making all sorts of facial expressions.
That's what the data suggests, which is kind of surprising, right?
Yeah, it is. What about the whole uncanny valley thing, where things get creepy when they look almost human, but not quite?
Right. You'd think that agents with those simple dynamic expressions might fall into that uncanny valley and kind of creep people out.
Yeah.
But this meta-analysis didn't really find support for that idea in this context. At least learners didn't seem to be freaked out by those kinds of expressions.
Okay, so it seems like maybe just having that social presence of the agent is the important part, whether its face is super expressive or not.
Maybe. So, okay, ready to move on to the next visual characteristic.
Yeah, let's talk about movement. Does it matter if the agent is static or animated?
So both static and animated agents had positive effects on learning. But here's the key. There was no significant difference between the two.
So it didn't really matter if the agent was moving around or just standing still.
Right. It seems like just having that agent there was beneficial whether it was animated or not.
Okay, now what about the action observation network theory that says we're really good at processing biological motion? Wouldn't that suggest that animated agents would be more effective?
You'd think so, right? I mean, the action observation network theory does say that our brains are wired to easily understand natural biological movement,
Right.
but this meta-analysis didn't find a difference. So maybe in this case, the simple presence of the agent is more important than whether it's moving in a super realistic way.
Interesting. Okay, we've covered how the agent looks and moves. Now let's talk about sound.
Yeah.
What about the agent's voice? Does it matter if it has no voice, a machine voice, or a human voice?
This one was also a bit of a surprise. They found no significant differences in learning based on the type of voice.
Really?
Yeah, now they did see a small positive effect for human voice, G plus of 0.20,
Okay.
but it wasn't statistically any better than a machine voice or even no voice at all.
That's really surprising because, I always think of a human voice as being more personal and engaging, especially in a learning environment.
Yeah, me too, but this finding might actually back up that computers are social actors idea again.
Okay. How so?
Well, think about how good those text-to-speech engines are getting these days. Like, some of them sound incredibly realistic.
They really do.
So it could be that in this context, at least learners are perceiving those high-quality machine voices as basically the same as human voices.
Interesting. Social agency theory talks about something called the voice principle, which basically says that human voice is better for creating a sense of social presence, but maybe that's not as true anymore.
Right. Maybe the technology is catching up and blurring those lines.
Yeah, it's amazing how tech is changing the way we perceive things, even in education.
Mm.
Right, so we've talked a lot about the agent itself, but what about the actual subject matter? Does it matter if it's a STEM subject or a non-STEM subject?
So they found that the broad category of STEM versus non-STEM didn't really affect how well the agents worked.
Okay, so they were about equally helpful across both categories.
Yeah, it seems so, but there's a little twist here.
Uh,
When they looked at specific disciplines within those categories, they did find some interesting differences.
yeah, like what?
So, for example, in biology and computing, which are STEM subjects,
Right.
and in English, which is non-STEM, they found positive effects, meaning the agents helped.
Okay.
But get this, in history, which is also non-STEM, they actually found a negative effect.
So that means the agents actually made learning worse in history.
It seems that way, but the researchers were very careful to say, hey, don't read too much into these subject-specific findings just yet,
Okay.
because we need more research that's specifically focused on those individual subjects to really understand what's going on.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it could be something about the way history is usually taught or the type of content itself. Who knows?
Exactly. There's so many variables.
Right. Okay. So subject matter is a bit of a mixed bag. For now, what about the learners themselves? Does their age or developmental stage make a difference?
That's a great question. And it turns out that the developmental stage of the learners didn't really change the overall effectiveness of the agents.
So whether you were in elementary school, middle school, high school, college, it didn't matter.
Right. That small benefit of using the agents seemed to hold true across different age groups.
That's encouraging. It means these agents could be useful for a wide range of learners. Okay. And what about the gender of the learner this time? Did the proportion of female learners in a study affect the results?
So just like the gender of the agent itself, the gender makeup of the learners didn't seem to have a big impact.
Okay.
The benefits were pretty consistent regardless of how many female learners were in the study.
Gotcha. And what about the pacing of the learning material? Did it matter if it was system-paced, meaning the computer controlled how fast you went through the material, or learner-paced, meaning you could go at your own speed?
They looked at that too and found that the pacing didn't significantly change the effectiveness of the agents.
So whether you were in the driver's seat or letting the computer take the wheel, the agent still provided that same small benefit.
Yeah, it seems so okay now for something really interesting.
Oh, what's that?
The language of the learning materials and the country where the study was conducted actually seem to make a difference.
Really? How so?
Well, they found that pedagogical agents used in non-English multimedia and in studies done in countries outside the U.S. tended to have a stronger positive effect on learning.
Oh, wow. Compared to English language materials and studies done in the U.S.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. So maybe there are some cultural or linguistic factors at play that we need to consider.
Yeah, like maybe people from different cultures have different expectations or ways of interacting with these digital instructors.
That's a really cool avenue for future research to explore.
Mhm.
Okay, and lastly, were there any aspects of how the studies themselves were designed that seemed to influence the results?
Yeah, they did look at a couple of methodological things. One was the type of control group used in the study. Like, did the control group get a similar learning experience just without the agent?
Right.
And it turned out that didn't really change the overall findings, but they did notice something else, that studies which randomize at the group level, like assigning whole classes to different conditions, tended to report larger effects than studies that randomized at the individual student level.
Huh. So that's something to keep in mind for future research.
Yeah, it might influence how researchers design their studies to get the most accurate results.
Mm.
All right, so let's zoom out and summarize the key takeaways for our listeners. What are the most important things you should remember about the effectiveness of these multimedia pedagogical agents?
Alrighty.
Okay, so big picture takeaway. Number one, Those on-screen instructors can be helpful for learning. They do seem to provide a small but measurable benefit. But here's the thing, the way they look really matters.
Okay.
Simpler is better. 2D agents are more effective than those fancy 3D ones. And that's likely because they reduce visual clutter and help you focus.
Gotcha. So less is more when it comes to appearance. What else?
Well, a lot of the things we might think are really important for making those agents engaging and effective, like their gender, whether they use gestures, make eye contact, move in a really natural way, even the type of voice they have, those things didn't seem to matter as much as we might expect.
Yeah, that was a big surprise to me too. You'd think all those social cues would be super important.
Right, but the research suggests that maybe learners are just responding to the fact that there's an agent there guiding them through the learning process, and the specific details of how it behaves socially might not make a huge difference.
Interesting. And that finding about the potential influence of language and culture is really intriguing too.
Totally. It opens up a whole new line of inquiry. Like how do different cultural backgrounds shape our perceptions of and interactions with these digital instructors?
Yeah, lots to think about there.
And as technology keeps advancing and these virtual characters become more and more sophisticated and almost indistinguishable from real humans, it's going to be really interesting to see if these findings hold up.
Yeah, will learners start to expect different things from these agents as they become more lifelike?
Exactly. Or will our brains still respond to them in essentially the same way, regardless of how realistic they get?
Hmm. Who knows? The future of digital learning is full of possibilities.
It really is. And for anyone listening who wants to dig deeper into this stuff, I highly recommend checking out some of the theories we talked about today, especially cognitive load theory and that computers are social actors framework. They can really help you understand how we interact with these digital instructors.
Yeah, and if you're involved in designing educational materials, these insights could be super valuable too.
Absolutely. Think about how you can apply these ideas to your own work.
Awesome. Well, it's been a fascinating deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And for everyone listening, thanks for tuning in. And as always, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep questioning.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Until next time.